Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Steps podcast. I'm Lou, and I am delighted to be hosting this podcast. This is a space where we share our experiences and reflections of entering into the Steps process. Steps, if you don't know, is a 12-week journey towards freedom, which is based on the well-known 12-step process, and this one is centered on the Christian faith. We often assume that 12-step programs are only for people with obvious addictions such as drugs and alcohol, but here we reveal how using these 12 steps can bring about profound hope and change at a personal level, no matter what addiction, behaviour or thought pattern is holding us back. Every episode, we share and reflect on the raw and unfiltered personal journeys of three participants, Jamie, Lars and me, Lou. We share how we began, grew and are still very much growing in this journey towards inner peace and freedom.
So today we're at step 12. Having had a spiritual experience as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to others and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So step 12, final step. Jamie, why don't you tell us how you found coming to step 12?
I think in recent months, more and more appreciated step 12. I think initially I didn't really see how profound it was and what it contains. But I think in probably the last 3-4 months, I've seen it really as a kind of roadmap and a lifestyle thing for every day and almost a summary of the spiritual life. So for me, practices that calls me to be spiritually aware of God's unconditional love, simplicity of remaining in that love and doing the things that are kind of housed in the process, and then looking at what does today look like in terms of loving service of people. So I think if those three things are in a day, I'm connecting to unconditional love, I'm living in the principles of the process, and I'm loving people. That's a really great roadmap.
It's a great roadmap. Lars, how about you?
I really love step 12. So the sharing bit has given me so many adventures and precious moments with people over the years, so many of them. And it is amazing to be allowed to share your story. And in my case, given that I've been around for a while, with steps, I've shared it many times, and there has been times where I've been a bit like, "Oh, I'm going to this conference, or I'm having this opportunity to share my story. I can't hear it once more." So, because of course I've heard it myself quite a number of times, but very often when that has happened, there's been something new opening up to me as I've heard myself tell the story. I've seen a new facet of the story. And then I end up being so grateful for what God has done. So there's a lot of joy, I would say, in connection with the sharing bit of step 12. And then I increasingly see the link between the sharing and the practice, how they go hand in hand.
The amount of times I have gone to share something of my story with someone, and it's been those times when I've like, "Oh, actually, I'm not sure Steps has done anything this time." And I'll share my story with someone and it reminds me of, and it almost informs me, oh, actually, things have changed. But it's not until I verbalize it that I start to realize that changes that I just didn't even notice are actually taking place. There's something very powerful about speaking a story out loud, regardless of, what happens as a result of it. Even the personal benefit I found really huge. But the thing that I love about step 12 is that we live in a world where there isn't always a lot of generosity. I know that's a sweeping statement, but I think it's such an easy way to be generous to someone in sharing story and potentially being able to help someone. And I love that as you go, or as I went through the steps, people were generous with me. My facilitator was generous with me. I felt God's generosity. I felt generosity in terms of making amends, and so much healing that it's such a wonderful opportunity to be generous to other people.
I so agree with that, Lou. And I'm also fascinated by how strong a connection point step 12 really is. Because what we are sharing in step 12 when we are sharing with others isn't so much, look how amazing I am or how well I have achieved, whatever. That's not the main story coming out at all. The main story coming out is actually back to step 1. It's the story of how powerless I was, how much I was in need of help. And it's amazing how that story actually creates connection with other people and real connections. Just think about in work life, professional life, in school, and so many other arenas, how much of the contact is on a rather false level, really. It's on a pretense level. I'm playing a version of myself. But the sharing that comes out of step 12 is directly connected to step 1, how I am a fragile human being in need of help from others and from God and even from myself. And how wonderful it is that that is available. So to me, that's just really fascinating.
And I think as well, the things that people face and the struggles they have and the pain they have is super complicated. And I think sometimes, certainly for myself, the temptation has been, I'm going to give you an answer. I'm going to give you a solution. I'm going to reason this away. But having a story and then just breaking off a bit of my story and saying, well, this is my experience. This is what I found. This is my journey. Really helps people. It resonates in a way that sometimes presuming that I have a solution or that I actually understand or that I have a way through. The way through is, hey, I've got a story. I'm going to break it off like a little bit of bread here. Can I provide you with that? And the other thing I absolutely love about that is there's no control over people. I'm just telling my story, and what they do with my story, what they choose to do with my story, is entirely up to them. But loving service is that thing of, I'm just going to give it away and then you choose what you would like to do with it.
I have found in the past, there's been times when I've been like almost a bit nervous about sharing a story because it is very vulnerable, isn't it? And it's very, like you said, Lars, it's you're going at a deeper level with someone rather than superficial chit chat. But actually what I realized was when I hesitated, I was like, well, actually everyone is going through something. It's a question of what are they going through and how might steps help them. And I think when I realized that, it took the kind of some of the nerves away around, oh, I don't want to be presuming they need this. But the truth is, we all need it, don't we? And when I've shared my story, even if the person hasn't gone on to do steps, they've been really grateful. And it's that analogy of sowing seeds, isn't it? It's not our responsibility what they do with it, but the power of just extending an invite is huge. And we never know what might happen with it. But it's very, very powerful.
That is so true. And it's also this journey of keep being in need of help, that we still need to reach out. We still need to be in the process, which of course is about the practices. We are practicing these things in all of our affairs. So what is that? I think it is in all of our affairs to be honest, to be vulnerable, and to be transparent, and to reach out for help, and just admit that we can't do this life on our own. That just changes us. And in many ways, I think this is what humility really is about, which of course is a big biblical theme. that is what that is about. It is to realize that it will always be like this. I'm not taking this course to be super strong or super competent, or then I've done it and I'm ready to move on. That's not what it's about. It's rather, I am in this process to actually remain powerless so I can remain healthy in the way I relate to myself, to God, and to others.
That idea really helped me, because back when I was doing steps the first time, working on fear of rejection, because I went into it feeling like at the end I need to be perfect and sorted, I almost felt like, well, I can't really share my story because maybe maybe I've had some freedom, but I'm not yet perfect, or I'm not yet exactly the person I want to be. So is there real value in my story? But it was really it was a really aha moment when I realized, actually, I don't need to be perfect. Actually, the beauty of my story is that I've realized I can't do this on my own. And I'm often daily at step one. And I think actually there's something freeing about when we communicate that with other people, isn't it? Because we're not saying, oh, here, I'm fixed. This thing is going to completely fix you and transform your life. It's more of letting them in on the beauty of being on a journey. And I think that can be quite appealing to people, particularly in an age where we're quite skeptical and cynical. So I love that kind of sharing from a place of powerlessness and vulnerability. I think that's really important.
And isn't that the amazing thing about unconditional love? That the love isn't conditional upon us arriving at some kind of, I don't know, emotional actualization where we never struggle and never have difficult feelings. But this love meets us still in the midst of the stuff, in the midst of the days when I fear, or I'm anxious, or I don't want to be seen, I don't want to be vulnerable. This love still comes after me and meets me there. And I think that's what the process is doing. It's saying you can live in unconditional love, even with these areas that are still a struggle. And step 12 says, to me it says, you're happier, healthier, and freer when you don't turn in on yourself, but you look outwards and say, even though I don't feel exactly the way I always wished I did feel, I'm still going to look out for who can I serve, who can I share, who can I be honest with. And what's really interesting for me as, say, a church leader is that when people talk to me about their struggle, I tell them part of my story that resonates, maybe not exactly, but I can say, for me, it looks like this. And it breaks something, because I think the classic idea of, say, church is there's the whole and the fixed and the healthy who never struggle. And then there's the people in their seats listening to the whole and the healthy. But I think there's something powerful when you stand and say, I understand what that looks like. I too struggle to rest, and the root of that restlessness is sometimes I'm proud and over responsible and think I've got to hold the world together.
Yeah, such a good leveler. And how did you both work out who your village were? So who you were going to talk to about your story? Because I'm assuming you didn't stand on your street corner and yell at anyone who was passing. Lars, what did you do?
Well, I didn't quite do the street corner thing, but in a way, to me it was a bit given because I was a pastor in a church at that time, so I already had a pulpit, so to speak, a place where I could speak about it. Of course, I did take a decision of mine to do that. I was working on pride, and it felt really humbling to then come clean, so to speak, and to say, well, church, what you have believed about me isn't really true. This is the ugly truth about the state of my inner life. But I did that. And as Jamie said, it was powerful to see what that did in the lives of people. So at that time, almost, I think it was more than a third of the church then came on the steps courses within a period of 2 years. mainly because of a story like that. So that became my natural village, so to speak, the people that I lived my life with, and in a way I had a quite natural platform to do that, so to speak. It was more difficult with, I would say, with my family, with the close ones, not my immediately family, but in the further circles. And I was actually hesitating quite a bit before opening up to them. But I'm really glad I did. But that felt way more difficult than to do it with people a bit further afield.
Are you, Jamie?
So for me, my village was and is anybody who will listen. So but my immediate family, and we just talk about it, just be really open. I'm on, with my daughters, just I'm doing steps again. This is what I'm working on, and talk to them. And I love being in a church and having opportunity to serve people in communication and walking with them. There's been lots and lots of opportunities to communicate the process I've been on, telling my own story. I think inserting the principles of the steps into lots of different contexts and applications, and so many opportunities just to say and to give away really the tools that I've found in the process.
It's really, one thing that I'm struck by is for both of you, I guess, how that's been such a blessing to have a community of people you already have to speak to about it. And I guess mine is a little bit different in that I've really, I guess I've had this desire to take my story. I'm not saying that you didn't have this desire, but I'm saying that for me, I really carried a desire to take the story to people who aren't in a church context, because I think it can really help people who are open to the idea of spirituality or a higher power, or who maybe haven't heard the story of Jesus and how that might help them. And I must say, it's definitely more nerve-wracking when I do it with someone who doesn't have a church background, because I guess for people who are in a church, they're quite familiar with the idea of a course or getting together in groups to do things. And this is a bit more alien to people who haven't had that same background. But I think this is, and we've talked before about, this is something for everybody. Everyone struggles with something, and everyone can get freedom from whatever it is, the unhelpful pattern of behavior or addiction. And so I've really tried to craft my story in a way that doesn't sound too weird to people. And that has taken practice. It's not just that I've been like, oh, here, it's just going to roll off the tongue. This is my story, and why don't you come and do steps? It's step 12 for me is about, okay, what is my story, and how can I communicate this in a normal way that doesn't make me sound like completely, if that makes sense.
So how do you do that? So I don't know.
You wouldn't ask you that.
You're at the school or whatever, wherever you go, and how do you start to tell your story in a way that just resonates for people without church language?
Well, I tend to do it with people I've already got a relationship with. So sometimes they know I'm on the course at the time. And it could be that we just start talking about how we're doing, and I'll just say, oh, I've been doing this 12-step process. And then I might ask if they know the AA, for example, or recovery process. And I say, actually, I've been doing a course where you can work on any behavior pattern or addiction. So then I will talk and say, I've been working on fear of rejection, and this is how it's helped me. I'm finding that I don't have the same urgency to say yes rather than no. And I'm being more thoughtful about kind of how I relate to myself and others and to God, or I will say that other people say higher power. And then I just start talking about how it's helped me. And I give a couple of practical examples of, before I was doing this and now I'm doing this, and it's really helped. And then when I've gone to invite someone, I've often said, hey, I'm doing this again. Would you like to do it with me? We could be in the same group. We can have a chat about it. And then I will point them to the introduction and say that there's obviously no pressure to sign up. And I definitely think, well, I've definitely experienced more take up when I say that I'm doing it as well. Because I think when you direct somewhere kind of, nebulous that they might have never heard of, can be quite overwhelming and nerve-wracking. But when I say I'm doing it, would you like to do it with me? And not every time at all, but there have been times when people have said, okay, yeah, I will. But I think there's different ways of doing it. And I think sometimes I will change the way I'm talking according to who I'm talking to. But I found definitely the most effective times is when I've been the most honest, when I've been really real. Like, I'm not trying to sell them something that's going to make them into a different person. But I think that as I try and be really genuine about my experience, that people are drawn to that quite naturally, I think, in my experience. But I'm very keen to hear from you both, whether there's anything you would say differently or any way that you would do it when you're talking to someone.
It sounds like a really good way to me, and pretty much how I feel like I'm talking to people also outside church context about it. My hairdresser, for one. So, yeah, I think it's very much about really being ourselves. And we are different, so it's very much about what is natural for me. So where would it be natural for me to share this, and what would be a natural way for me to share that? I think that's very much what it's about. So it isn't artificial. It's not something that we push, but it is a gift that we give out of generosity to others because we know how much it can really do. And I think that's the important thing. And what we know about the process is that we can't promise a very specific outcome, isn't it? Because we have so many stories about different ways that people have encountered the process and experienced the process and the outcome of it. So, which in a way is also a bit of a powerless situation to be in. How much easier it would have been to say, I know exactly what's going to happen. If you do this, then that will happen, and this will happen, and this will be the outcome. Suddenly that seems way more appealing, doesn't it? But we can't. So we're in a position actually where we learn to celebrate powerlessness more than anything. And even in invitations, because we can't make promises of that sort. But what we can do, as you say, Lou, is just to be frank with, this is my story, this is what's happening in my life. And to give concrete examples, I think is brilliant, a brilliant way to do it, which makes it way more relatable.
How about you, Jamie?
I think there's something powerful about the influence we have. And I found that in just telling my story and being enthusiastic about the process and what I've experienced and what God has done has sometimes sown seeds in people. And then very often I watch to see whether it grows. And then if there's a response to my story and what I've expressed and shared, then I might send a text or say, oh, there is another one starting. There's an introductory evening starting. Do you want to come along?
I think inviting someone into something in community is really powerful, isn't it? I'm really struck by how many people are lonely and how many people don't really share the deep stuff. And it's something just so I mean, anyone who's done Steps is part of a Steps village ourselves, aren't we? We're part of this community. And I've heard so many times and experienced myself the power of other people hearing and thanking me for sharing, or I thank other people for sharing really sincerely, and really growing to really love the people that you're in a group with. And I think that's such a wonderful invite for someone to be able to extend that invite of being in a community where everyone's working on their stuff. And you know, you as we've all said, really, we never know what's going to happen with the invite. But I don't think I would ever be offended by someone else inviting me to something, even if I didn't want to do it. It's nice to be thought of, isn't it? And let's just talk very briefly on kind of the course coming to an end and being at the end of step 12. Because in a way, my experience was I felt a bit of grief. I was like, oh, I've really journeyed with these people and now it's ending. And there was definitely a part of relief as well, like, oh, I've done it. But there is a mixture of emotions, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Like, what have you both done in ending well, but also knowing that that's not an end, is it? It's the end of that particular course, but the principles will obviously keep going. And Lars, tell us just firstly how you have kind of processed that.
Well, I have found it challenging in a way, to be honest, because the process is so intense. And I'm being so helped by being in the process and having this weekly touchdown and opportunity. So at times in my life, it has been challenging to keep practicing these principles in all of my affairs because of the lack of this weekly reminder. So that's definitely something that I am very much aware of now, and I've become more concrete in terms of, so how will I help myself remain in the process? What are my helplines, so to speak? So that is something that I have become really aware of. So I think I believe that's my main point. So what we have in the group, we need to find elsewhere. There need to be people that we can have a ongoing communication with about, so these are the things going on these levels in my life. And it's not so much about accountability. I'm growing less excited about that word, to be honest. It's more about sharing, simply. Just sharing and the power of that.
Yeah. And you, Jamie?
So on an internal level, the process, the 12 steps are like, you know how grapes grow on a trellis and the trellis holds the grapes and supports them. So for me, the process itself is the wooden frame that I can build a spiritual life on, like an operating system or a culture in my heart. So I'm all the time thinking about probably steps 1, 2, and 3, powerlessness, help, and surrender. Every day in step 10 through the inventory, and step 11, and then thinking of step 12 in terms of loving service. So that kind of creates a mechanism to process life through. I found facilitating a group has been a huge way of being in a group, of being a servant of other people, time to have a phone call with other people as they talk about their process, creating a space where people can get freedom in a steps process. And actually this kind of podcast for me is part of a step 12. It's part of a way of lovingly serving people to provide material that helps people in their process.
Yeah, I really love that. And I also find that kind of link to that, knowing that I'm going to do steps once a year really helps me at step 12, because I'm like, this isn't the end. And like you said, Jamie, I try and give back in other ways, even when I'm not doing steps, by having regular conversations or supporting facilitators, that kind of thing, and then facilitating myself, and knowing that that's not a hard end and that I'm still in the process, just not formally, say, every Monday night at 8 o'clock, and that I will be again. It's such an important reminder to me that it's not there's not an end point necessarily. This kind of finding freedom is a journey and a process, and it's really important for me to stay in this process rather than see it as, oh, I'm done, I've graduated, I'm never going to graduate. And actually I'm really peaceful about never graduating. Lars, as we finish, why don't you say the Serenity Prayer?
Very happy to. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.